Canada as a 51st state to the United States? We've talked about it a little bit, but it's actually a proposal that is being seriously considered by some people in Canada. Not necessarily everybody agrees with it, but there is a lot of talk around this very issue in Canada. There's even been some polling. And the tariffs, of course, are a huge issue with our neighbors to the north. Joining us to discuss is Randy Hillier. He's a former member of the Parliament of Ontario. He actually, for 15 years, 4 successful elections, he represented the people of Lanark-Frontenac as a conservative, and then later as an independent member of the provincial parliament. He was the first elected representative in Canada to oppose the COVID tyranny, the lockdowns, the mandates, and he was even invited to speak at Senator Ron Johnson's COVID roundtable in Washington, D.C. And just recently, he has returned to politics in a senior leadership role with the Ontario Party. Before joining the political world, he was a construction electrician. He founded the Lanark Landowners Association, where they were urging the government to stop meddling with the lands of rural peoples. Randy, it's great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us. I think when Trump first talked about Canada becoming the 51st state, people kind of laughed and thought it was maybe a joke or not something serious. But he has now said it several more times, and there seems to be some element of seriousness to this. What are your thoughts on this, Randy, and what are people in Canada saying?
Well, thanks, Alex, for having me on the show. And yeah, initially, people in Canada were dismissing this as something off the cuff and trivial by President Trump. But I don't think President Trump actually is so flippant as some people think he is. He's a pretty measured. He may not use the most precise language, but his meaning is pretty clear. And when he says he wants to do something, I think people better listen to what he's saying. And so this idea, of course, a 51st state, on its face sounds a little bit ludicrous when you're talking about a country much larger than all the states, the present states, combined geographically. Right now in Canada, we have 10 provincial jurisdictions, which are very similar to the state jurisdictions. And so I sent a letter to President Trump to flesh out this idea and see what is he actually proposing or considering. And things like, is each province going to be granted statehood and have elected senators and congressmen? And just to give a bit of the lay of the land to the people in the United States, all our provinces except one have a smaller population than your smallest state of Wyoming. So here in Ontario, a very large province, about 14 million people, very substantial economy, as well as the other 9 provinces and Northern Territory. So in this letter, I suggested to President Trump that this would be a very complex negotiation, very complex to actually create states out of Canada and put some ideas forth to him. But I should also say, as a result of this and this continuing discussion by Trump about the 51st state, there's been some national polling done, and this was fairly striking. 30% of Canadians were amenable to the idea of becoming or joining the United States. And that number went up to 43% with younger Canadians. So I think that's a bit of a reflection about how so many Canadians were disaffected and disenfranchised with the current state of politics in Canada as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Randy. There's several elements I want to talk about here. I did read your letter to President Trump, and I saw you're proposing that each of the provinces would have equal representation as our states in the U.S. Senate. So each one would get 2 U.S. senators elected to the Senate. Congressional districts would remain the same. And so from a political perspective, at least it seems to me, based on what I know about Canada, based on what I've seen on your elections, that would dramatically shift the United States to the left. It would also make the United States quite a bit poorer My understanding is that even your richest province is poorer than our poorest state. So from an American perspective, this would make the United States more, I think it certainly would make Canada a little bit more free. But talk about what that would mean politically for the Canadians and for the United States to have 20 Canadian members of the U.S. Senate and maybe 50 plus new members of the U.S. House. That'd be like several Californias and New Yorks coming into our union.
Well, okay, yes, there are elements, and that's why it's important to know what the details are. What's being considered before you can make an informed decision and choice. Does the United States actually want 40 million Canadians being in their union, many of them who are woke and left? But let's not, our electoral system gets very much skewed by the heavy population centers, just as yours does. We don't have the protection of the electoral college because we don't actually elect our executive branch of government here. So I think if we had a more reasonable in a system like the electoral college in the U.S. And actual elected senators, because we don't have that here either, they're all appointed, we would probably see a different political makeup. The great many Canadians who aren't woke and left might have a little more representation and balance things out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, these are all important considerations now that this is actually being seriously talked about. And you do propose in your open letter that each of the provinces would have to have a referendum on whether to be admitted to the union. That sounds like a sensible proposal to me. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something else, Randy. I'm sure you're familiar with the ideas of globalists at the Council on Foreign Relations and other places to create this North American community, very much modeled on the European Union. We've had, of course, officials in Canada and officials in the United States working on this for a long time. We got WikiLeaks documents released many years ago. Even back in 2007, the Bush administration, the U.S. ambassador to Ottawa, Paul Cellucci, plotting on how to get around our constitutions, how to eventually create even a North American parliament, a North American currency. These ideas disturb me greatly, knowing what I know about the globalist plan for regionalizing government and then globalizing government. Do you think this plays in any way to these dreams of creating a North American union and eventually even incorporating Mexico into some sort of union?
So, like you, I am very much opposed to this globalist agenda, the WEF, that to me, those are abhorrent. I believe the more borders we have, you can't escape if you don't have borders. Let me put it that way. So whenever government becomes oppressive, you want to have borders that you can get across and get elsewhere. There's no perfect situation or scenario, but I will say, others have floated this idea of an economic union, and I find that would be the absolute worst of all worlds, Alex. That was what happened to the European nation states. They got suckered into this economic union called the EU, which then stripped all of them of any sovereignty whatsoever. That is not, and their electoral system in the European Union makes the elected representatives, eunuchs when it comes to legislation and decision making. So I know some of the more prominent Canadian business people have been suggesting that as well. I think that would be a terrible outcome for both the United States and Canada, in my view. But I think we need to explore these ideas and see if there is benefit, value, and I think there's many Canadians who would love dearly to have the level of constitutional protection that your Constitution provides that we don't have here.
Yeah.
So it could be a win-win. It could be a lose-lose depending on how things go. And I think it should be up for discussion and more in-depth analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you 100% about these proposals for economic union. We would end up very much like Europe, ruled by unaccountable bureaucracies. And unfortunately, that process is marching on without people really thinking about it. Through the USMCA, we've got these North American tribunals, these North American regulations. And of course, Mexico is part of this as well. And all that has been happening kind of under the radar, but I think people need to be having open and honest discussions about it, especially when we have the primary source documents showing that there are very powerful people, including Klaus Schwab, who think this is the way the world should move. In his book on the Great Reset, he talks about the European Union being a model for North American integration as an interim step to globalization. And frankly, this is something that Americans and Canadians, I think, overwhelmingly would reject if it was presented to us in plain and honest terms. Randy, I want to switch to the tariffs a little bit. I think Americans haven't really thought about this much. Average American hasn't really thought about this much. But for Canada, this is a huge deal. The Canadian economy is really dependent on the United States, both exporting to us and importing from us. What is the general sentiment? I've seen some Canadians very upset, some of your government ministers and liberal politicians on TV saying we ought to put 100% tariff on Teslas to punish Elon Musk. What's the view of Canadians, generally speaking, on these tariffs, and what do you think?
Well, the political establishment has done a pretty good job confusing the people in Canada that this is a fight against Trump and this is a fight for the flag. In Canadian nationalism. And this is the same group of established politicians who, for many, many decades, have been diluting and diminishing the value of the Canadian identity. We have a Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who even has gone out on the record and said Canada has no identity and that we are a post-national state. So, how can, on one hand, you be a post-national state and have no identity, but rally to the flag, the Justin Trudeau flag, because Trump's the bad guy here? In this idea about placing tariffs on an individual company is just absurd. Like, no court would stand for that. But I find it interesting that, those words were mouthed by one of the most left-wing socialist elected members here in Canada, who promotes the green agenda at every opportunity, Jagmeet Singh from the NDP, he wants everyone to have an electric vehicle, apparently, but now he wants to double up the cost on the most popular and best-selling electric vehicle. So this, again, more contradictions and hypocrisy, but it is serving to confuse people a lot. And I think it's important. Canada and the United States has had a very beneficial relationship for, our entire history. 80% of everything Canada produces and exports to the world goes to the United States. Over 60% of everything that we import comes from the United States. So, there are valid questions posed by Trump, regarding our military and our lack of ability to defend our nation. But, that goes in part by not having to do very much, having the preeminent military and economy in the world next door to us. But, in time of need, in the Second World War, in the Korean War, in the First World War, Canadians have mobilized to a far greater degree and have punched above their weight. So, but there are real concerns. I'm not sure where there's some confusion here that the trade imbalance indicates a subsidy of the United States. I mean, that's a little bit of a stretch for me to digest. But we have a beneficial relationship, and whatever we do, it should be to improve that relationship or improve trade and commerce and interaction between Canadians and Americans, because at the end of the day, we're, pretty close cousins in my view.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many other things I want to ask about. We're running out of time here. The King comes to mind, right? Canada, I think a lot of Americans don't realize, as part of the Commonwealth, your head of state is, of course, King Charles, and joining the United States, I think, would require you to abandon your allegiance to your king. But
we should do that regardless, Alex.
Okay, that's interesting to hear you say that. I know some Canadians feel that way. A lot of Australians feel that way, but it is what it is. We've got, of course, the Bahamas right 100 miles off the coast from me, where they also recognize the king. But Randy, I want to ask you also about COVID, because you saw this scam, you saw this tyranny, and very few others in Canada, it seems, were at least willing to speak out about it in as public a way as you did. The dust has settled now. We can all see, at least everybody with any sense can see, that this was a disaster. It was an attack on our most fundamental freedoms. It caused horrific and unnecessary suffering. And yet, as far as I understand, in Canada, like in the United States, nobody has really been held accountable for this stuff. How should Canada move forward, and how should America move forward on dealing with what was done to us over these last few years?
Well, this is a big problem, Alex. To move forward, we have to look in the mirror and say, what is our culpability? And, the American state, the many players in America, in the deep state, in their entrenched bureaucracy and their corporate partnerships, were very complicit, as well as both Canadian and American intelligence services and corporate players. So, there's a lot of people that don't want us looking deeply in this. And I think this is one of the things. There's been far, far more investigation in the United States at the congressional level than what has happened in Canada. And, we also see with the revealing of U.S. aid just how deep and penetrated the media world is by the deep state, and how that COVID con was allowed and facilitated by taxpayers' money unwittingly. And the same thing has happened here. We need to break this partnership between the entrenched bureaucracy, the corporate partnership, and our media. That's before we can ever get to the truth.
Yeah. I mean, I was in Florida for most of that time, and so we didn't live through some of the worst excesses, but I remember looking at Canada and pastors being arrested for opening their church, truckers having and people who donated to truckers having their bank accounts frozen with terrorism legislation. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you expect in totalitarian third world dictatorships, not in civilized, at least once Christian nations, part of the free world, part of Christendom. It was really, really alarming. And of course, we had some of those abuses here as well, but nothing on the scale of what happened in Canada. Randy, we've only got a couple minutes left. What's the best way for people to follow you, and what's next for you? I know you're still very active in the political realm. What are you hoping to see happen in Ontario, in Canada, and beyond?
Well, one of the things in this the current general election here in Ontario is we're introducing, if we're elected, a Sovereignty Act, so that we would no longer pledge our allegiance to the Crown, but to our Constitution and the people, and so many other elements that are really important here. If people would like to follow me, my X account, unfortunately, is still very heavily censored. If you've got a way to nudge Elon, at Randy Hillier is my X account. My Facebook is randy.hillier. And really the only place that I have no censorship at the current time is Substack, which is randyhilliersubstack.com. So we've got lots of exciting things happening here in Canada, and wouldn't it be nice if we had things like referendums and self-determination for everyone?
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Randy Hillier, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all you've done to speak out on behalf of freedom and the rights of not just Canadians, but people everywhere. We appreciate it. Thank you for your open letter to Donald Trump and laying out clearly really the implications of this and what are the things that need to be thought of. I hope people will follow you on Substack and X, and I hope we can talk to you again very soon.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Alex, and look forward to chatting again sometime soon. Maybe after Donald, the president, responds.
Absolutely. All righty. Thank you, sir. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. This is Conversations That Matter. I'm Alex Newman, senior editor at the New American Magazine. We appreciate you so much. Share this out with your friends, especially if you got friends in Canada. But this is a subject that is relevant to all of us. I want to thank you again for tuning in. Get over to thenewamerican.com. And until next time, God bless you all.